Welcome everybody to this month's edition of Community Talks. As always, we're very happy to see our community represented here. And I'm also very happy to show once again one of our very interesting projects being presented here today. Our speaker of today is Tessa Avermaet from KU Leuven. Her research, her key areas of interest and expertise are food and nutrition security, sustainable food systems, agriculture, and sustainable diets. The presentation will be about towards sustainable food systems, contrasting food insecurity and abundance. So I think this is a topic that we haven't had here before. It's a very interesting topic, and I think I don't need to say much more, and I will give the floor to you, Professor Avermaet. Oh, I think you're still on mute.
Indeed.
Yes.
After so many years after COVID, still starting unmuted. Okay, good. But now you should see my presentation. Yes? Okay. And I just need to change one thing. All right. Thank you very much, Larissa, to giving me the opportunity to give here a talk today on sustainable food systems. You haven't had it yet, but I'm sure it is something that concerns most of you. In fact, we eat 3 times a day. We make choices. It's in fact the way we can express our emotions, but also our political statements, our feelings about society. 3 times a day, you make choices on what is on your plate. So it is something that whether you're in the north or in the south, whether you're old or you're young, it's something that concerns us all. And that's also why I like the topic. I can talk on this topic with my colleagues, but also with my children, with my neighbors, with friends, with families, whether it's in a pub or on a serious platform. So that's what we are going to talk about, sustainable food systems. And the direct reason for this presentation is, in fact, the Global Food Security Conference that took place in April last year in Leuven. It was organized together with Maarten van Ittersum from Wageningen University. And we also received some support from VLIR to work together with Elsevier Foundation to give voice to some excellent scientists, female scientists from the Global South. Maybe first something shortly about myself. So I'm agricultural economist. I work at the University of Leuven at the Faculty of Bioengineering. I see some colleagues here in the room as well. But I have gone through my career through the food system. In fact, first of all, I'm the granddaughter of a farmer in Flanders. He had 7 children, and 5 of the children, 5 of my uncles, in fact, became farmers. And I see now how the 4th generation is working on the same land as my grandfather, but doing it in a completely different way sometimes. So I see the evolutions in my family. I studied agricultural engineering. Then I moved up to Ghent University and I studied the food industry, so another actor in that food chain. Then I moved up to the University College, being surrounded by nutritionists, by midwives, by nurses, but also people teaching teachers, which is very interesting, of course, a completely different perspective. And I also learned how important it is to communicate in a clear way as a scientist. We sometimes expect people to understand all the science that we are doing, but there's really need for more science communication and doing it in a way that people do understand. And we have seen that also with the whole, for example, in Flanders and the Netherlands, all the nitrogen discussions. Sometimes when I was reading in the newspaper, the articles, I was like, who is going to understand what is written down there? So we really need to be careful with all the concepts that we use. Also, when it comes to food, I think of concepts like agroecology or now regenerative agriculture, as if people all understand the same on that. I worked for 7 years at the University College, and then I moved up back to the university, where I now work since 2014 on European projects on sustainable food systems. So from farm to fork, as we say in Europe. But of course, Europe is not an island. You need to see it in a broader perspective. And that's why I also work a lot on the global food security systems, to see how things interact with each other. And that's what I'm going to start with. Global food security, what does that mean? What is behind it? And we start with a short definition. And then after that, I will talk about the challenges and the opportunities. We especially face today, the challenge of the growing population, but at the same time, also on the consumer side, we see that there's a lot of opportunities to make the system more sustainable for us in our daily choices as well. I will come then with some key messages on global food security. And then I move towards the project that was a direct reason for this presentation. So the Global Food Security Conference, and how, as a scientist, I see our role in raising voices, but also in communication and in assuring that all the voices in the food debate are heard. And if you want, by the way, so you can intervene while I'm presenting as well, but I for sure leave a lot of space at the end of the presentation. We will have about 25 minutes, I think, for comments. And so you can already put them in the chat box if you like, or you can write them down on a paper and ask them afterwards. Let's start with global food security as a concept. What do we need to take into account? Today, we are all worried, will we have enough food for maybe the 10 billion people that we will be with by 2100, maybe 11 billion people? Well, food security has a lot of perspectives. It's not just about producing enough for these 10, 11 billion people on Earth. Food security, and then I come to the definition that Amartya Sen, that you see here on the slide, already gave in the early 80s. It means that all people at all times have physical, social, and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food that meets their food preferences and dietary needs for an active and healthy life. So we produce enough and healthy food today, but also for the next generation. That means that the earth that our farmers are working on today, the soil, fertility, for example, needs to be safeguarded. We need to take care of that, but we also need to take care of ourselves. If we look at the features on healthy diets, then we see that there's an urgent need to shift diets, not just in the north, but also in the south. Let's then maybe move towards this big challenge that we have with our food system, and that is assuring that we feed enough people. And if we look at how the population is growing since the 50s, we see that in the 1950s, so after the Second World War, we were over 2 billion people. Today, we are over 8 billion people, and population is still increasing. It is not increasing everywhere. And it was recently in the news said that in Europe, for example, the fertility rate is decreasing. People want less children. And by the way, we also see that among the own students. If you ask around to young people, do you still want children? Some people are concerned about the future. So that's what we see here, that in most continents, the population is stabilizing or even decreasing, for example, in Asia. But there's one continent where the population is still increasing, and that is Africa. Especially in sub-Saharan Africa, we face a real problem because it is in that region exactly that we still have a lot of hunger as well. So there's an urgent need to produce enough food for the growing population. I said there's a problem when it comes to producing enough food, but, and this is what you see here on the graph, maybe the opportunity or the challenges to manage demand is even higher than the one to meet demand. And I will explain you this slide starting from the bottom. In the bottom line, you see the time where we were 6 billion people. 6 billion people, that's about a decade ago. On the left side in the red, you see that at that time we had over 1 billion people being overweight. That's on the left side. And then on the right side, you see, yeah, over 1 billion people also suffering from underweight or hunger. Then if you go up to the situation today, we have more than 2 billion people suffering from overweight and obesity, coming together with a lot of health diseases. A lot of cancers, cardiovascular diseases are related to our diets, which are not healthy at all. On the other side, we see that on the right side of this of the block, that the number of people suffering from hunger and malnutrition is decreasing. It is increasing again over the last years, and that comes together with a lot of geopolitical issues, of course. If we then go up, we see the line for 2030. The problem of overweight and obesity tends to grow a lot. We expect that by 2030, we will have almost 4 billion people suffering from overweight and obesity, and it's getting worse. So projections right now are not very hopeful on that side. On the other side, if we achieve to manage demand, there's a lot of opportunity out there for making that system more sustainable. And of course, we need to also meet the demand. There are still people on Earth that suffer from underweight, that have hunger, that can't access the food that they need, even though there would be enough food to feed everyone today, providing enough calories. So that's a bit a challenge that we face. And having that in mind, you see that a lot of people, especially younger people looking towards their future, they're angry, they're concerned as well, because they realize, well, there's no planet B. We'll have to work on Earth and make our food system more sustainable. And of course, it's not normal that especially these young people also raise their voice a lot, because they're really, really concerned. They want the system to be more sustainable, and at the same time, they plea for making it more extensive again, using less pesticides, using less synthetic fertilizers, for example, pleading for more local food. And we will see in this presentation what kind of arguments are really helping our food system to become more sustainable, and where we should also be critical. That's on the consumer side. On the producer side, we also see that farmers are worried, are concerned, because they see that, these worried consumers, they put a lot of pressure also on fruit production, not just the consumer, not just the citizens, but also from policy. You see that policy wants to make our system more sustainable. We see that in Europe, but we see that also elsewhere in the world. The producers, they are worried about their future. They say, well, we do want to do our job in a good way. We want to produce enough food for the people, but we get so much regulation, and we don't know how to manage that on our farm, how to be profitable. And again, there you see that a lot of young people come to the street to raise their voices, because they see, well, in the next 10, 20 years, we know that there change is needed, but please give us the right direction, assure that we can still have a good business model, because after all, these farmers, they're entrepreneurs. Yes, they need to make a living of what they're doing. They want at the end of the month also to feed their families. And then what you see in all the discussion, as I already also mentioned, there's a plea for a more sustainable food system, there are more sustainable system overall. Then how important is that food production or farming in the whole system of everything that we do, in all our activities that we have, also industrial activities. And with this graph, you see this focuses on greenhouse gas emissions, that indeed food production takes a lot of the global emissions. About 1/4 or even more of the greenhouse gas emissions on Earth are related to food production. And then you see on the right side of this graph how that is then split down into the different activities of food production. You see a lot of these greenhouse gas emissions relate to land use. You're using the land, for example, not to have a forestry on it, but to use it for human food production or for livestock production. We also see that's on the green box. There's a lot of greenhouse gas emissions related to crop production for human food and for animal feed. And then in red, you see livestock and fishery activities, how much that takes of the greenhouse gas emissions. And I especially also want to draw your attention to the blue boxes, because that relates to other things than primary production. That's the supply chain. It's remarkable that, for example, transport only takes 6% of the food emissions. So where our food comes from, that comes a lot in the media, that it is so important in terms of greenhouse gas emissions or in terms of making the food system more sustainable. Well, after all, the impact is not that big. People sometimes think that food, when it's traded, that it all goes in the plane, or that there's a lot of, and it is flowing in when it comes to the other side of the world. Well, actually, a lot of food is transported over the roads by trucks, for example, or by boat. And in fact, the greenhouse gas emissions related to that kind of transport are relatively limited. Also, food processing, packaging, and retail belong to that 18% of the supply chain on top of this box. What does that mean for the products that we consume? And the next slide, I'm sorry, it's in Dutch, but I'm going to go over some important elements. On top, you see beef. Beef, and you see the CO2 equivalent, so the greenhouse gas emissions related for producing 100 grams of protein. You see beef has a lot of greenhouse gas emissions, brings a lot of greenhouse gas emissions with it. If we go down, we also see cheese, kaas in Dutch. That's already a lot less. Milk as well. And then even lower, you have, for example, pig, you have poultry, you have eggs, and in green, you see plant-based products. So overall, you can say that plant-based products, the greenhouse gas emissions that relate to that production are a lot lower than, for example, animal-based products. And a bit of the same figure arises when we look at land use. We are a blue planet, and that's what you can see here. Over 70% of the Earth is in fact water, is oceans, is sea. Then we have about 29% that is land. Of that 29%, about 70% is habitable land. And then you still have glaciers, of course, and you have barren land, in fact, where we can, as humans, not walk on, so to say. Of the 70% habitable land that we have on Earth, we use about 50% for farming. So there's a lot of farming on our blue planet, in fact. 37% is for forest and 11% is shrub. And then you see also just 1% for urban and build-up land. So for example, where we have houses where we sit right now, that's about 1% of the land. Let's look down into what is farming, what the farming land is used for. We need about 77% for livestock, meat and dairy. So for example, cheese or yogurt as well, and 23% for crops. What does that bring us? These livestock, meat and dairy brings us about 18% of our global calorie supply. Plant-based products bring us 82% of the calorie supply. So this is a very important picture to understand why, when we talk about making everything that we do more sustainable, that there's a reason why there's so much focus on farming as well, because farming is using a lot of land. Yeah, and if you do farming on a specific land, of course you can't have a tropical forest, or you can't have a forest on it. So that is why it is so important. And then if we look at the products that are on our plate, in fact, and this one is in English, you see how much land you need to produce 1 kilogram of food products. Having in mind already, you saw in the other slide, the greenhouse gas emissions related to food production. Well, here you have land use, and we see a very similar picture, in fact. Beef, for example, needs a lot of land to produce 1 kilogram of food. We also see dark chocolate. Luckily, we don't eat kilograms of dark chocolate a week, but it also has a rather big impact together with coffee, for example. And then you have animals like pigs and poultry. They have a lower impact, of course, than beef. And then at the bottom again, we have the plant-based products: wheat, maize, rice, bananas, potatoes, tomatoes. So if you have all of this in mind, you may understand why there's so much plea for transforming our diet towards more plant-based diets. Right now, in fact, for example, in Flanders, so the Dutch-speaking part of Belgium, where I know the figures, we take about 60% of our protein intake comes from animals, 40% comes from plant-based products. We need to shift that, and it is possible to do it in a healthy way. It is not that we need so much meat to feed ourselves in a healthy way. Even further, you can even feed yourself in a healthy way without meat. There are a lot of alternatives out there, like, for example, beans, but also chickpea. There's also a lot of proteins, for example, in wheat products. So there are a lot of opportunities out there. At the same time, so I already told you how important food production is in terms of our greenhouse gas emissions, in terms of the land use. So overall, in terms of sustainability, the choices that we make as consumers are very important. But consumers get a lot of messages today. They get messages on the labels out there. They get the suggestion to eat more local, season-based products, to invest in the short supply chain, so exactly know who the farmer is that you buy the products from. And in a way, the key message for the consumer is a little bit undersnowed, as you say. And that key message, in fact, for the consumer should be: eat more healthy, avoid food waste. A lot of food is still wasted at the level of consumers. And also, there's a need to eat more plant-based products. These are key messages, coming back also to the other picture that I showed, where with these figures on obesity, the growing issues on obesity. This should be the key message for consumers. Away from all the labels that we have, away from all the polarization in the debate, as a consumer, the first thing should be: make the diets more healthy. And especially for kids, because at the level of kids, unhealthy diets, in fact, jeopardize a lot of the future of our young generation. That's for the consumer. What about these food producer, and especially what about the young farmers? I'm talking a lot with young farmers. I'm in the board of the Flemish Young Farmers, and I work together also regularly with the European young farmers. What is the message that they have, in fact, for us as a society, and more specifically also for policymakers? Because they're angry, they're concerned about the future. What do they plea for? They ask for an equal level playing field. They say rules should be the same whether you produce in the Netherlands or you produce in the South, in the US, or in Latin America. These rules should be the same if you're if you're delivering to the same market. So it should not be so that in the supermarket in Germany, for example, you have eggs that are produced in a very sustainable way next to eggs that are really produced in an unsustainable way for the same price in the same shop. That's not an equal level playing field, and that's what they really plea for. That's also when it comes to trade negotiations that they're concerned about. For example, the trade negotiations between Europe and Latin America. Farmers are concerned that by opening the doors for more trade, that they have to compete with farmers that have other regulations than them. They also want future perspectives. If as a farmer, as a young entrepreneur, whether that's in Europe or that's in Asia, you invest not just for 3-4 years, no, not for one legislation, but you make investments for 20 or 30 years. It costs a lot to invest in farming, and they want to be sure that regulation does not change every now and then, or not terribly changes. Of course, it can change a little bit, but that it doesn't go like one way, the right way, and the next legislation is completely to the left. That does not give a lot of security for these young people. Also, they want respect. If we see today the debate on food, you see that sometimes respect is lost for the farmer. And space for entrepreneurship. I already told you, a farmer is an entrepreneur, just like a hairdresser or a car producer. They're entrepreneurs. They want to do innovative things. They want not just to just give you a potato, but they want to also innovate continuously. What is then solutions that we from a science-based perspective have for making that food system more sustainable? Well, we do need innovation because, as I told you from the beginning, we need to produce more in food in the future. It's not going to be helpful to say, well, we need to use less inputs and we need to go back to the way our grandparents were farming. We do need to produce more food, but we will have to do it with a reduced environmental impact. So we need to do it in a different way. And we also need to take care of the livelihoods of equity and the social capital in the sector. That is something we should not forget. That's what we call, in fact, sustainable intensification. So let's not go back to the Middle Ages when it comes to food production. Let's innovate. Let's embrace innovation and think at the same time, how can we produce more but reduce the environmental impact? Of course, as academics, we do have a role to play there. We educate people, whether that's in farming or it is in political sciences or in medicine. We are educating people, so we need to bring the right message out there. We're doing research. Also with our research, we give a certain direction, and we need to feed the dialogue to communicate about what we are doing, but also to listen to the different voices out there in society. That's one of the reasons that I was really pleased that we could bring the Global Food Security Conference, which is a 3-year conference, to Leuven this year. We wanted to make that conference interdisciplinary, which means between different disciplines, transdisciplinary. We also wanted to have the voice of different actors in the food chain heard. Internationally, obviously, we're not talking about global food security and doing then everything from a European perspective, for example, and interactive. After, at the end, trying to create as much as possible impact. And then now I come to the project that was also received the support from VLIR. We embrace the cooperation or the initiatives that are already out there. And one of these initiatives that really helped to raise the voice of scientists and more specifically of women in the Global South is the Elsevier Foundation. They give every year a prize to female researchers that are trying to raise their voice in the public debate and doing things in an innovative way and have made a long way. A lot of these women that received the prize this year, they come from areas where there's a lot of political instability, for example. And we wanted to bring them to Leuven and to give them a voice to tell them their stories. We also work together with table debates. And what's the nice thing about table debates is that they help us to have an outreach also after our events. They're investing a lot, for example, in making podcasts, in making videos during conferences. And in the whole project, we experienced that mutual trust, saying, well, here we need support, for example, from Elsevier Foundation on certain responsibilities in the food conference. Take them and do it the way you think is good. So that's about trust and about sharing responsibilities. What are the outputs that you can listen or view after this presentation if you want? We made an animation video on global food security, where we try to explain in a 7 or 8 minute video these challenges and opportunities on making the system, the global food system, more sustainable. And it's animation. I think it's really nice done by an animator. Then we also included art. There again, we got some support from a group at our University of Leuven, which wants to have art as a leverage to communicate about science. So I will talk about that in the next slide. And we also made a lot of interviews and podcasts, among others, for example, of these women from the Global South that received the Elsevier Foundation Award this year. So they can share their experiences, they can share their learnings as well, and you can listen to that at any time you want. So I think that's a really nice, that was a really nice cooperation with the people from Table Debates. All right. Then, as a last slide, before I give the floor to you for questions and discussion, I want to tell you something about this piece of art. This is what an artist made for us for the Global Food Conference, in fact. And it represents a farmer that holds an egg in the air. And the egg stands for the vulnerability of the earth that the farmer is working on, but also the vulnerability and the fertility of the earth that he's working on. It's very fertile, it's very vulnerable. An egg, it's like the earth. If you break it, you can easily break it. So you need to take care of it. You need to safeguard it. And the artist also told me that the egg, in fact, is 2 or 3 times as heavy as the farmer itself. So you need support. You need a whole society to carry, in fact, the egg and take care of it. We put that statue somewhere in the main entrance, in fact, in the main hall where we had the Global Food Security Conference, and people could also draw their ideas about what they think is a sustainable food system and their feelings when they see this piece of art. So I think it's a nice way to integrate science, art, in fact, into the scientific community. That is, in a real nutshell, what I would like to share with you. I can imagine that you have a lot of questions or suggestions, and that will then be, start a real discussion.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Avermato. Thank you so much for your presentation. I thought it was going to be interesting, and it turns out it was. So thank you so much. Yeah, it's one of those topics where you immediately get the sense of how urgent it is and how global it is. So yeah, I think it was a wonderful presentation. We already have some questions in the chat. I will scroll.
That's what I like. Yeah, I see. Yeah. All right. That's good.
Scroll back to the first one we've received. We have someone who asked, I would like to know what research says on the Foundation for Farming Methodology from Zimbabwe. How can it help improve food security? Is there something specific maybe for that country where you know that there's some additional research?
Maybe it needs, what is exactly this Foundation for Farming Methodology? You mean in general, what is our message towards improving food security in that region? If that is the question, well, what we see, of course, in Europe over the last decades, in fact, since the starting of the Common Agricultural Policy, what we have done is we have been using a lot of inputs in our food system, and using more inputs has come, and using a lot of innovation, of course, has come with an increase, a dramatic increase, a real increase in productivity. What we see is also with the Green Revolution, where where there was also put a lot of more inputs into the system, also in regions in the Global South, and it also came, for example, with innovations like the golden rice in Asia, that it brings a lot more productivity. What we still see in many regions in Africa, and especially, for example, in sub-Saharan Africa, is that inputs are still very limited. And where we in Europe has the real challenge of reducing inputs in reducing synthetic fertilizers and pesticides, for example, we see that there is an opportunity to use more inputs still in a lot of African farming systems. Because of course, if you don't put anything into your system, it is quite obvious that you're not going to get too much out of it. So I think in that sense, there's maybe a very positive message here that there's what we call a big food gap. There's a production gap, in fact, in many regions still in Africa, a production gap in the sense of your productivity right now can still be increased a lot in implementing specific technologies. And I come back to an example, for example, of close by where I met a young farmer recently who went to Malawi. He's producing here wheat and sugar beet, and he went to Malawi and he said it's amazing how much potential there is still for these young people out there in the farming, because by using different technologies, by using different inputs, more inputs as well, making the soil more fertile, they will be able to produce so much more. So I think that might be a positive message. And at the same time, of course, you have a lot of geopolitical instability that we need to really, that we should all work on because it does not help the food system as a whole, of course. It does not help you if the situation is very politically stable, then you're not very likely to invest in farming. So yeah.
Mhm. All right. Well, thank you so much for your answer. There are, I think, two questions relating to the graphs that you've shown in your presentation. The first one is how much of the greenhouse gas emissions percentage on livestock and fisheries can be designated to fisheries and aquaculture?
Yeah, I don't have that figure, so I need to look that up. I would say I see they come from André de Kock. Feel free to send me an email on that. I can easily probably look that up. A good source for this kind of data is in fact Our World in Data, which is led by a scientist like Hannah Ritchie, and there you can easily find back for any product that you want, the impact, greenhouse gas emissions, also land use. So this is a real good source to look at. So sorry, I need to look that up before I say something on that.
All right. There was another figure. It's again another question by André de Kock. In the figure, land use per kilogram of food product, where fish and seafood go in that figure.
Yeah, indeed. So for the same, Andre, there I need to look it up because I'm not a specialist when it comes to fish and seafood. So yeah.
All
and
right.
if anyone else in the audience might be, please put it in the chat. So Andre gets an answer very soon.
All right. There is a question relating to Ethiopia. Someone asks, in Ethiopia, there is a huge livestock population despite of poor production and productivity. In such cases, what do we need to do to improve our productivity with lower methane emission?
Yeah, indeed. That comes back to what I said, that there's a lot of potential. It's a very, in fact, hopeful message towards countries like Ethiopia. There's a lot of productivity gains to be achieved, but of course, with so much political instability, it is the question is who's going to take the lead there for innovation. You do need livestock there as well, also in your farming system, to also for the manure that you get out of that system. But at the same time, the inputs, if the inputs are so low, if you don't use, for example, fertilizers, how do you expect to have outputs when it comes to yields? So I think there the message is we need people, we need political power to invest in the sector, to assure that there is innovation taking place, to increase yields, also when it comes to livestock. And where we say, of course, the methane emissions need to be reduced, and their livestock plays an important role, of course. But there's a huge difference between methane emissions from the Flemish livestock sector and from the one in Ethiopia, right? So we really need to put that into perspectives. That's in fact in line with my message. Yes, we need to reduce synthetic fertilizers and synthetic pesticides at the global level. And especially, for example, in these high intensive regions like the Netherlands, like Flanders, where we have high yields, but at the same time use too much inputs in way to have a healthy system. But in Ethiopia, for example, you will need more inputs to reach a higher productivity.
All right. I have some more questions relating to Zimbabwe. Someone said, in Zimbabwe, through the government's blueprint called National Development Strategy 1, NDS1, it is now mandatory to carry out research on climate-smart technologies. These range from conservation farming, such as Pumbutsa, climate-friendly pest control strategies, or research such as the use of biopesticides and plant extracts. Food security is improved by reducing the cost of production and improvement of soil ecosystem. It's not a question, but I think it's really cool that these practices are in place in Zimbabwe.
Yeah, it's nice to share that experience. And in fact, you see all over the globe, farmers are also thinking together with governments, how can we make the system more sustainable? And what we see, there's so much out there. Think of plowing, for example, the no-tillage methods that are applied now, where we see very good results also when it comes to soil fertility. Then you have biopesticides, but also, of course, integrated pest management, which is not really moving from synthetic to a completely organic farming system, but somewhere in between. So I think there's a lot of also opportunity to share these experiences. And what I also see when talking with the Young European Farmer Association, for example, SEJA, there's a lot of willing among farmers to share their experiences. So it would be nice indeed to, if governments would encourage that even more.
This person also continues by saying that pesticides have a long persistence in food crops that we consume, at times still with the pesticide residues, having huge health implications. So they continue to say that the importance of looking for more sustainable solutions. Yes, I see one more question by André de Kok. How do you see the role of fisheries and aquaculture in the future food systems? Will these need to grow? And what about emergent pollutants entering these food systems?
Yeah, of course. I'm first of all, I'm not a fishery or an aquaculture specialist, but what we see is that we need better regulation also when it comes to fisheries, right? And in terms of aquaculture, of course, there's also a lot of opportunities, also innovative systems. You see, for example, aquaculture farming combined with greenhouses in Flanders, for example, and André probably knows then, we have this combination between aquaculture and tomato production. In how specifically these challenges are for the fishery system, I will need to find an expert that helps you out on these questions, because it's a bit too far from my own domain. So, yeah.
All right. There is another person sharing some more insights on the situation in Zimbabwe. Someone here says, research on the foundational farming methodologies in Zimbabwe reflects a blend of traditional practices and modern innovations aimed at improving agricultural productivity and food security. And they've shared two key aspects that with the conservation agriculture, that many studies highlight the importance of conservation agriculture, which emphasizes minimal soil disturbance, permanent soil cover, and crop rotation. And it can improve soil health, enhance the water retention, and increase resilience to climate variability, which is crucial for food security in a region prone to droughts. So that's already a very key aspect, and something that proves to be very, a sustainable solution. The other one is agroecology practices. The ecological methods such as intercropping and rotational grazing have been promoted to enhance biodiversity and ecosystem services. Research shows that these practices can improve soil fertility and pest control, leading to better yields and sustainable agricultural systems.
Yeah.
That's really nice to hear in the chat that people are really sharing the practices in their countries, in their communities. And yeah, it's like you said, it's nice to see that around the globe, more countries are starting to think of how can we do this in a better way? How can we improve the soil? How can we improve the crops for this generation and the generations to come?
Yeah, and there's a lot happening indeed in research, but also luckily also in practice. And we should maybe invest even more in assuring that there's a dialogue between research and practice so that farmers find their way towards scientists, but also the other way around, that as scientists, we don't just focus on publishing high-level articles on these kind of things, but also that it reaches out those people that we want to use this knowledge to innovate. I also want to make one remark when it comes to, indeed, you mentioned conservation agriculture, agroecological practices. You can mention many more concepts that are entering the debate, like regenerative agriculture, agroforestry, etc. That's all very positive. They have all very good elements. The only problem I see a little bit in all these concepts is that people get lost. Also, if we read in press, for example, now about agroecology, or you read about conservation agriculture, many people don't know anymore what is really meant with it. There is a good thing with the organic farming, because with the organic farming, at least at the national level or at the European level, we know organic level goes together with a book of practices that you can and can't do in organic farming. While for agroecology, conservation agriculture, regenerative agriculture, there are a lot of definitions out there. And it does not really help the debate when people are looking with different definitions towards certain concepts. So in practice, brilliant that a lot of things happen, but in the food debate, what I see sometimes that all these concepts are mixed up, and they in fact adds towards polarization in the debate. So that's something that I want to draw your attention to. If you communicate about these practices, assure that the one you communicate to understands it in the same way as you do. That's something we need to take care of as scientists, but also as people being active in the sector.
I see that the person who shared a few of these key aspects, it's Ms. Francesca Benson. You raised your hand. You want to say something?
Okay. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you for having me on this webinar. The concepts that I highlighted, I work under the Ministry of Agriculture in Zimbabwe. So some of the concepts that I highlighted, there are things that are actually being actioned in our national plan involving smallholder farmers, rural communal farmers, because in our country, almost 60% it's rural and 30 is urbanized. And in the 60% population, that's where all the agriculture happens for food security and everything. So I just wanted to add and say it's something that we're actually doing in our country. And we have like pamphlets and people who go out into these areas to help the information so that from the science perspective to the communities, they can understand what we're trying to implement and how it's better for them.
Yeah, it's really nice to see governments that take responsibility in helping these smallholder farmers and the farming sector as a whole. In fact, I maybe want to add there when it comes to empowerment, it's also very important to respect their willingness for and their capacity to be entrepreneurs, to add value also to products. Yeah, if you sell, take the example of potatoes or sugar beet or yeah, those are materials, products as such that are very cheap. They compete on a global market, so you need to think with them, how can they really add value so people are willing to pay a fair price for the product that they produce. So it's about raising the voice of farmers, but also making them more professional to think from a market perspective, to think economically, and not to make them, now we made a lot of farmers very dependent, for example, on subsidies. It is so that they need it because because it's in a historical perspective, it's normal. But we also need to think them more economically towards the future, to make prices more reflect the real price for food. Now that is, people say sometimes food is very expensive. Well, if we really would ask for the true cost for food, it would be way more expensive than we pay now. And that is also why one of the reasons why I'm really not in favor of this kind of promotion when it comes, for example, to beef or any food product. In fact, it is as if it is that cheap. It's expensive. It's expensive, not just the price, the working hours, but also in terms of sustainability, in terms of the impact it has on the environment. The price that we pay today does not reflect at all the real price of food.
Yep, yeah, indeed. We have another question from a viewer from Kenya with the question: water quality might have a bearing in affecting the quality of agricultural products more so than the emerging pollutants. What is your take on this? Or as an additional factor, maybe the water quality can also affect the quality of the crops.
Yeah, I don't see the question in front of me, but wait. Okay, can you repeat it, Larissa?
That water quality might have a bearing in affecting the quality of agricultural products, and what your take is on that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's the whole thing with food production, of course. Now, for example, in Europe, coming back, taking that question to Europe again, we look so much at nitrogen, but the next discussion will probably be about water quality, of course. You can't have farming without water. So we need to indeed assure that all these aspects are worked on simultaneously. So yeah, water quality is so important, and it will become even more important as climate change will be more visible, or we will face it more in the future. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. We have another question by Boudewijn van den Bossen. You rightfully mentioned both the consumer and producer sides of the food system and the transformation. However, how do you see the middlemen, being big trader firms in seeds, pesticides, fertilizers, grains, foodstuff, etc., and the retailers? What is their role in the transformation? And do you think they can be a possible catalyst or rather a barrier for change? And maybe also what the role is for governments in this regard. It's a lot of questions, but yeah.
Thank you, Boudewijn. Really relevant, because often if we have these kind of debates, and especially when you have it with farmers and governments that are focusing on farming, it ends up with, but they're the big players and the bad guys in the food system, and they need to reduce their profits, etc. I can assure you that also the middleman, whether it be the food industry or the retail, they also feel a lot of competition, but also a lot of pressure to change the food system. They also have a role for sure to play in making that food system more sustainable. But it's a bit, of course, the question of the chicken and the egg. These big players are looking towards governments, and the other way around, governments say, well, you have the responsibility because you're one of these big actors and you're internationally often. Think about the Nestle's, the Monsantos, the Bayers in the food system. What we do need is a government that puts the playing field in place that is fair, that is reasonable. It can't be that we, and now I'm taking an example that all of you probably know, that we in Europe import GMO soy into our food system to feed our animals. And at the same time, Europe also says, well, we don't want GMO soy on our land because it's no good for the environment. We're not going into a GMOs discussion here. Maybe that's for a next time, but it is very incoherent. So what governments have as a role to play, whether that's in Europe, in Africa, or in Asia or Latin America, doesn't make any difference. They need to put a system in place that is fair, that is reasonable. If you ask your own farmers to invest in environment, in reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. It can't be that you close your eyes for the imports that you have, or that you export towards markets and do it like we did decades ago. Also, we just dump it on markets, and also in that way put friction on these local markets. So we need coherent governments, and at the same time we need also food industry, retail, but also the suppliers of the food production, the suppliers of pesticides, of seeds, even of machineries, to think in towards more sustainable ways. We just need more healthy debates on that.
Exactly. There's also another question about herbicides. What is your take on the continuous use of herbicides to clear land for agriculture production for the food insecure populations in sub-Saharan Africa, taking into consideration of the food security definition?
Well, herbicides are not used for fun. If farmers use herbicides, they use it because they need it for plant production. What is the problem in some region is that herbicides are used too much because of guidelines, because of knowledge, because of expertise that is lacking. So what we need is a better transfer of the insights that we have in how to use it in a good way, in a balanced way, so that it does not jeopardize the system as a whole, that it can be transferred from generation to generation in a healthy way. I won't ever say, well, we don't need herbicides, because farmers are using it for a purpose. But in Africa or in Europe, wherever you use it, we need to assure that it's used in a healthy way. And the same counts for the pesticides. The same counts for the fertilizers. They're not used just for fun, but we really need to think on how to reduce them and at the same time not jeopardize the production too much.
Okay. Yes, I see that it's already 12 o'clock. I suggest there are 5 questions left. They're all really interesting. So maybe I suggest we look at these 5 questions, and unfortunately we'll have to conclude the session here. Maybe if it's okay with you, Dr. Avermaet, we can maybe share your email address if people have some additional questions.
I put it in the chat box. For
okay,
sure.
Perfect.
You don't only need to share your questions. Also, if you have suggestions or nice examples you want to share, please,
Yes.
it can only enrich the dialogue to share experiences. And that's what we need, in fact, in a healthy food debate, that people constructively add information. That's nice.
Exactly. I see here a question by Antoine Romatsungi, who is a worker in the cocoa sector. And he asks, do you think that a sustainable food system should depend on the sector? To give more context, he works in the cocoa sector, where the cocoa production is ensured by the countries from the south, while processing and consumption are done in the countries from the north.
Really good comment indeed. That is one of the things. In fact, I bring you back to my own master thesis, which was in the year 1999 in Leuven, which was on the incoherence between the European agricultural policy and our policy towards developing countries. It does not make sense to help farmers in the south to produce more, and at the same time they do not add value. We import raw products that have not much value added. A potato is a potato wherever you produce it. Sugar is sugar. So really, to add value, you need to invest in the whole food chain. And it would indeed be reasonable to have more processing or more industry based in the global south, and not just I'm from Belgium. We are chocolate country, but we don't have any cacao. Wouldn't it be more logic that you have the production, the processing as well in the countries where you have the cacao? And the same, by the way, for coffee. And that brings us also to another discussion. In fact, we are investing in research on biofertilizers, where we want to make biofertilizers based on waste from fruit and vegetables. When we look at coffee, for example, we import coffee, and we are with the leftovers of the, if you clean the coffee beans, we are with leftovers from that primary production. In fact, if you would have more circular food systems, it would mean that this waste from the coffee, we would need to export it back to, for example, Latin America. Of course, that doesn't make sense at all. If there would be more processing done in these countries, they would have more economically viable sectors. And at the same time, it would be more circular also when we look at this ecological system. So yes, I fully plea for that. Yeah.
I'm not totally not an expert about this topic, not at all. So then maybe that's a stupid question I'm going to ask, but why is it that this processing and production is not done in those countries?
Because we want to add the value ourselves.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, we want to make profit.
Okay, so
Yeah.
that's mainly the reason why.
That's very opportunistic. Yeah, yeah.
Right. I have another question here about plant health, where plant health is highly threatened by more and more invasive pests, and how this is considered in the food system.
Yeah, especially when you have, of course, monocultures and you have then one pest, for example. Of course, we have a global food system. It's a global system, which also comes with pests that we are not used to treat. So yeah, how is it considered right now? We try to fight it, but we should try to do it more in an integrated method to make it, to use the right elements to fight these pests. Yeah, it's there are different responsibilities there. It's in how you grow the plants, how you of course detect also that pests take place. Yeah, I don't really know how to tackle that question. It's the responsibility of different actors in the food chain to deal with that.
This is kind of, the next question is kind of related to what you just said about the cacao farming. Someone asked, how can food be recycled and not injurious to human health? So I feel like the recycling of the food, maybe that you said that maybe those biofertilizers made from fruits and vegetables. I don't know if that's exactly what they mean with this question, but they also ask, is it also an advisable means to ensure safe and secure foods, especially in Nigeria?
Yeah, recycling food comes with a lot of health risks, of course. In Europe, you know that we are very, very safe on food. We had the dioxin crisis, for example, which afterwards we installed a lot of traceability measures for food. Recycling food for human consumption is something that I would not recommend as the first thing to do. I think, for example, in regions like Nigeria, it would make more sense to invest in having less waste, for example, between the yield, also really at the farm level, but also in transport, in storing food, then going to recycle food for human consumption. There are so many risks combined with that, that you need to put priorities, and that should not be the priority, to recycle food for human health.
So it does come with some challenges and risks.
Yeah.
I suggest there some questions have been added now, but I suggest we only do 2 more because we're already 7 minutes past time. Someone asked, the food industry or business is mostly dominated by mafia business groups. How can this be addressed in global perspective?
Yeah, some people also call the big companies, of course, mafia. I think, you need good governments that really intervene when you do have mafia practices, or when you have unfair trading practices. That's something you really need. That's the role of a government to assure that. And then, of course, when we look into some very poor countries, of course, there's the fight against mafia. That's a fight that does not only hit the food sector, the food chain, but hits the whole economy. So yeah, that's something that needs to be dealt with. The question is whose responsibility? It's the responsibility of all people with power, I would say. But it is, yeah, it's something we should recognize as an issue. Yeah.
And then I think it's time for the last question. They ask, how do you promote rural neighborhood farming as a food security tool?
What exactly, how to promote rural development, you mean? Or safeguarding the rural areas? That's the way I would interpret that question. So rural areas, it was already mentioned when the person from Zimbabwe intervened. Yes, there are countries on earth where you have still a lot of rural areas. In regions like where I live, rural areas are really limited. You need to protect, I think, the rural economy as a whole. Because if you just have the farmers, of course, in the rural areas, yeah, it's not nice. And if you think from a farmer's perspective, you're living there with your family and there's, for example, no school or no social life or no other economic activities, it is not nice to live there. So we really need to assure that the whole economy in that rural area is revived in some areas. And that also comes together with the other comment that was made on the processing. You need to have other actors of the food chain being active also on the countryside to revive that economy. So yeah, it's certainly important that we think about that, and in Europe as well. In Belgium, of course, it's no issue. We are very densely populated, but there are regions in Europe where people just run away from the countryside and where indeed only farmers are left over. And there's so many other regions, of course, in the global south where you have the same situation. We need to assure that these rural areas are lively, that there are schools, that there are social activities, that there's an economy taking place, so that is, yeah, people see the desire to stay there and to also produce food there.
And with those words, I can say that we are wrapping up this month's session. I would like to thank you once again, Dr. Avermaete, for your presentation, for your wise words, for your suggestions, yeah, for your inspiration as well. You can see that, you know, the questions in the chat, they are a testimony of how important this topic is for everyone, I think, around the globe. Yes, I do also want to say next month there will be no community talks. We are taking a short summer break, but we are starting again in September. If there are people in the chat who are interested in doing one of these talks yourself, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We are still looking for a nice new projects or nice new partnerships to be hosted on our platform. Yeah, for more additional questions about this topic, as we've said before, Dr. Avermaete has shared their email address in the chat. Yes, and I think then all that's left for me to do is to wish you a very nice rest of your day.
All right, and I put that short video in just 7-8 minutes on global food security in the chat box. Wishing you all a nice day, and thank you very much for being here. And as I said, please share your experiences or questions by email. Most willing to join that discussion further.